Welcome to Data-Driven Leaders, a podcast for business and technology leaders who are trying to shape and influence the future of data and analytics. In each episode, we feature conversations with data-driven leaders who are at the forefront of using data to solve complex business challenges. Let's jump in now and uncover some of the biggest challenges today's data-driven leaders face and find out what it really takes to build a data-driven culture.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Data-Driven Leaders. I'm your host, Christina O'Reilly, and this episode is brought to you by Gen Squared, a service provider dedicated to solving complex data analytics challenge for today's enterprise. So I started these podcasts to help drive a conversation, right? A conversation among data leaders where they could share with us their insights into the challenges they face, help articulate what it takes to become a data-driven leader and shine a light on the unlimited potential that data can provide. In some of our previous podcasts, we've talked about how to build a data strategy, the importance of data management, and how to drive business value from your data. And at the center of all of this are the leaders themselves who are tasked with not only moving these data initiatives forward, but also helping to build a data-driven culture. So today we're going to talk about data leadership, what it is, and more specifically, what it's not, right? And how to lead with a purpose, and what are some of the tangible ways that you can become a high-performing data leader. My guest today has been data obsessed for over 20 years. He's an international keynote speaker, university lecturer, has led the enterprise data function at Ubisoft, and is currently head of data at Bombardier Recreational Products. Please join me in welcoming David Dadoun.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. We're gonna talk about data and data leadership, things that I love to talk about. So yeah.
But before we start, I have to ask you, how much Assassin's Creed are you still playing?
Quite a bit. I can't. It's always been my favorite game. That's the game that I actually really got into in the beginning, and that's how I got to know Ubisoft. But it was back in the days,
right?
And I just kept on going with all the new installments and that came out because they're just so much fun.
Exactly. So let's dive right into it, right? You've held multiple roles where you've led the enterprise data platform, and you've seen a lot. Talk to me about, what are the trends that you yourself are seeing as it relates to leadership, and more specifically, what are the ones that you don't want to start seeing? Like you really wish that we really would address it right out of the gate.
Well, I think that if you go back in history, the data leader was really someone who was purely a technical savvy individual. It really started that way because, let's face it, it was databases and ETL scripting. Mm-hmm. But that's not really everything there is to know about data. Data is transversal. It kind of just goes anywhere it wants, whenever it wants, however it wants. It's kind of the lifeblood of your organization. If you think of it as, your organization having business processes, just like your body has like veins and arteries, and the data just like kind of flows through all those processes and through your body. Well, it means that having just the technical knowledge is not sufficient anymore to be a true data leader, or the way I see data leadership as a successful key player in the organization. Your data leader needs to have that business acumen, needs to be able to understand how to leverage the data and how to help your organization find ways of applying it so that you can derive value. And it is not just a technical project, because data is not an IT system, right? You're going to leverage those IT systems in order to be able to enable the usage of data, the collection of data, the transformation, the cleansing, the governance, all those things. But data is much more than that. And the leadership for data needs to be a hybrid of that technical expertise, because let's face it, you can't lead a technical team if you yourself don't necessarily understand what's going on. But you can't lead a data team if you don't understand the business strategies and where your organization is going and how you're going to enable and support those strategies, leveraging data and that entire stack of technologies that you're going to use to bring it to the forefront.
Right. I think it's time that we start looking at data as data sits here and data is just only this, right? Data is literally the lifeblood of an organization, more so than ever. You talked about, the need to have a balance of technical and business. So let me ask you this question. With all the advancements of technology that's happening at lightning speed, how are today's data leaders tasked with keeping up and on top of, developing their business acumen?
We avoid sleep and we drink a lot of coffee.
And you have your little snack packs on the side,
I
right?
got my snack packs, I've got my coffee, I've got everything that I need to be able to stay awake and read up on everything that's going. The truth is, I love attending conferences and networking, and I find that being in the academic world, in academia, teaching, learning from others are ways that I stay on top of what's going on and what the trends are, what the hype is versus what the reality is, because it's also very easy to get caught up with all the buzzwords and all the hype, and being able to sift through what is real versus just someone trying to sell you something, because there's always somebody trying to sell you something, right? And to me, that comes through reading, following up on podcasts. Networking is one of the key components that I find that helps me stay on top of things, and going to those cutting edge events where you get to see what other people are doing, and then meeting up with them and asking them what's going on in their reality and how does that impact them.
Well, again, it goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning when I decided to put this together, these podcasts, it really was to build a community. And it really was to kind of bring everyone together to really talk about some of the more pressing things that we're seeing in the industry, not just from our standpoint as a provider from data analytics, but also to bring together some thought leaders, right? So you're absolutely right. It's about immersing yourself into the environment.
Completely. I mean, I'm part of a collective of individuals that are, thought leaders and data experts and everything. I have colleagues and friends that are in Denmark, that are in Sweden, that are in Italy, that are in the UAE, in Canada, in Romania, and we are all part of a big network, a sort of alliance where we can tap into each other's experiences and share what we do, what we don't do, what we should be doing, and what we shouldn't be doing, But it's a great way of continuing to stay in touch with the reality of a world that is in constant transformation. Organizations transform, but they transform in big part because of, the marketplace and, all those macroeconomics realities. But data is a force in transformation for organizations as well. So keeping in touch with these people everywhere in the world, for me, is a beacon in how I can continue to know what's going on.
And the beautiful thing is not just by a vertical or industry, right? So that's interesting. So let's talk about what it's not. Let's go right to I want to go right to what it's not for a second. And in your opinion, what should data leadership not look like, in your humble opinion?
It shouldn't be about politics, and it shouldn't be about control. Very often leaders like to centralize and, to control their departments, their functions, their domains and whatnot. And in certain business functions, it works, right? Like finance, you want to have a structure and a control and a centralization, like a hard, solid central organization. But in data, you need to apply more of a federated approach because of the nature of data that is transcendent to every single tower. It's a transversal reality. So you can't be the type of leader that is going to solely look at centralization as the approach to build your organization and your structure to support data. It's not going to work. So you need to be someone that's malleable, that can live with, the punches, roll with the punches, because it's always moving and it's a very, very challenging industry. You can't be someone, the leadership in data can't be too focused on just what they are trying to accomplish for themselves, it needs to be borderline a selfless role, because you're not doing it for you.
Right.
You're not doing data for yourself. You're doing data for the rest of the organization. So it's a little bit different in, compared to maybe some other roles.
Well, a couple of thoughts there. Number one, I remember, as I started my career in marketing, the whole conversation of who owns the data between sales and marketing, right?
Right.
And back then it was like, no, marketing owns the data, and like, no, sales does. So gone are the days where you don't hear that anymore, right? You don't hear about who owns the data. So that kind of, that reminded me of, of the structure, so to speak, going back to your point. Can you give me some examples of how you yourself or handled in your career the unselfishness of that you mentioned, and how you really, brought forward some of the ideas that you mentioned just now?
I think for me, it's how you structure your organization. If you think of, let's just take data governance as part of what a CDO is supposed to put in place.
Right.
A lot of organizations are going to want to centralize that data governance into one group, and all the data stewards and all the master data people are all in that single organization, and you become like a ticketing system, and you lose agility, you lose flexibility, you lose the business acumen that you have when you are part of those business teams that you're trying to support. When I approach data governance, I approach it in a very federated approach. A very federated model. And so, yes, you do have a small core team that's there to build the standards, build the policies, do the auditing and whatnot. But you want to keep a lot of the stewardship, the vast majority of it, to be honest, along with the master data resources, the ones that create the data. You want to keep that in the business. And I've often been asked, like, shouldn't we put this in your org? Shouldn't we centralize this so we have better control on it?
Mm.
And there are pros and cons. Yes, you'll have better control, but when you're going to need to change a field in your system, or when you're going to need to update something, it's going to take a lot longer. And data needs to be agile. It needs to be flexible for it to deliver value. So take away from the, I want to build an empire and have a huge team and all that stuff. It doesn't matter. That's not where the value that a data leader can bring to the organization comes from. It's more about making sure that, yes, we have a core and we have governance and we have policies, but let's make sure that people have the ability to do what they need to do with the data.
Right. It's about making sure that they have access to the data, but also making sure they understand what information they're in front of and how they're using it as well. How much, in your opinion, does storytelling of the play into your role, and not just about the vision of where you want to go, but does storytelling also play in the approach and how you execute your strategy? Yeah.
I love that you're bringing this up. Storytelling is such a huge part. And I'll tell you why. One of the big things that the data leader needs to be able to do is to educate. It's to mobilize and to bring people, because not everybody understands data. It's a relatively newish thing that everybody wants to do data, and everybody thinks it's cool and fancy and all that stuff, but not everybody knows how to decipher the data, or how to understand, again, what's hype versus what's reality. So I use a lot of analogies, a lot of metaphors, a lot of stories in order to explain what data teams do and how do they do it and where are they going and what the strategies are. And when I'm presenting to my executives, more often than not, I'll use stories to explain it. And I can give you an example, but I've put together something that I call the data kitchen. And ultimately, it describes how an individual makes a recipe and makes their meal. And I take that whole chain of events, from the farmer planting the seed and growing the potato to it appearing on a shelf in a store, and then the individual coming in and bringing it to their house. And I map that back to the flow of data and how somebody is going to be creating a record inside their ERP, and it's going to flow into the warehouse, and then somebody's going to come and check that data out and build their report. And when you explain it in non-technical terms, you're kind of, in French, we say vulgariser l'information, like you're
Right.
transforming it in a way that makes it a lot more palatable to people who are not from that world. If I go and I present to people who are not data folks or technical folks, everything about how, the architecture of your data warehouse and the platforms and the layers and the engineering, and you lose them, you lose
Yeah.
their understanding, and it's completely normal. It's not their world. The same way they would lose me if they started to describe like some engineering concept that I've never heard about.
Right.
So it's about taking what you know and bringing it in a way that people can relate to it.
But not everyone has that skill to be storytellers. So how do you develop that? And does it mean now that we need to have a repository of stories that we can pull off the shelf, or out of the pantry, so to speak?
I would say no, not really. And I'll tell you why. Because you want to adapt that story to the reality of your organization.
Yeah.
So I'm right now at BRP, I'm in an organization that's very engineering focused, right? We build fantastic, fun toys like skidoos and sea-doos and all those amazing quads and all that stuff, right?
A lot of fun toys.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. But we have a very strong engineering background, mindset, and everything. So when I build my stories or when I explain things, it might be a good idea for me to relate it back to how does a snowmobile get built?
Like a manufacturing process.
Exactly. So you kind of want to attach it to who you're speaking to, what your organization is. So just having template stories doesn't work either. It needs to be, again, palatable and relatable to the individuals that you're telling the story to. And if I'm working for a grocer, I would use a different approach to explaining the story and what I'm trying to accomplish. And I do the same thing when I'm selling in a project. I give them an analogy and a metaphor of what we're trying to accomplish in a way that they're like, oh, okay, I get it.
Yeah, I think now you're starting to, if you really decompact or deconstruct the qualities of a leader, right? So clearly there's an element of soft skills or power skills where you really, and I've mentioned this before in some of my previous conversations, where it's about really diving into your EQ, your ability to collaborate. And so being in the academia yourself and having that perspective, does it mean that we need to look at building data leaders and however course or path that they take that encompasses a much broader humanistic approach to how they are engaged?
Well, absolutely, because again, data is transversal across all the different powers of an organization. So you need to be able to build those relationships with all of your peers, right? All the other VPs and SVPs and C-levels in an organization that you work with. You have to have really good communication with them. You have to be able to work with them and work with their realities, because your teams are going to be dedicated to them, or their teams are going to be dotted line into you, or different models that you choose to apply is irrelevant. But you have to have that collaboration and that communication ability to work in a matrixed organization. Again, if you're trying to over centralize, you're not going to be doing anybody any favors. You can't be on an island in a silo when you're working in data. And if that's what an individual would like to do, that's fine, but it's just not the space for data.
So have you ever come across a scenario where what you really wanted to drive forward was that conversation around data that is more holistic, federated? And if so, that really was more challenging for you to kind of transcend that conversation? And if so, what were some of the things that you employed to help really build the picture? And I guess storytelling would be one of them, but is it also about, enabling that data curiosity within an organization to kind of do more of a show and tell of what you can do with the data?
There is a lot of show and telling, of course, because you want to bring concrete examples. I also use examples from other organizations of, when I'm trying to explain the importance of having strong governance and good data quality programs to ensure the data is accurate. Well, there's a couple stories that I like to bring up about where data quality issues took their amazing AI initiatives and kind of ruined them. And I think that illustrates the reality, because you kind of see the flow of why did it happen? Oh, I get it. Okay, this is how the bad data got into the system. And this is why the AI was wrong in providing its forecast or its recommendations or its prescriptions and whatnot. So bringing those examples to light helps, definitely. Right. Now, when we talk about the federated model, bringing that reality to life is difficult. It is difficult because
why?
It's not how organizations have been working from a data perspective. That's not how data has been seen. It's always been we need to bring everybody together, and we need to centralize, and we need to this and we need to that. And I agree that sometimes if you're over decentralized, you do need to bring everybody together for a certain while just so that we can get all the basics down packed. But then you have to start to send those back out in the different lines of business and recreate that closeness and that relationship and that business understanding for the data people that are connected to their lines of businesses or their business teams. So it's a shift in culture. Some organizations can live very well with it. Some organizations that haven't worked this way need a change in how they perceive things.
So it sounds like we're removing the constraints. But sometimes when we remove the constraints or the walls, we don't feel comfortable. We don't understand or that balanced approach sometimes is just not something that we're used to seeing and function within.
It's change management at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
It's all about the communication and the change management. And sometimes that's the longest and most complicated item to tackle and resolve.
My background is primarily ERP, and gone in first ERP days, when the PeopleSofts of the world and Oracle of the world first came about, change management with an ERP implementation was the number one blocker. And so it's interesting how in some of the conversations I've been having, change management still comes up.
Right? And it will continue to come up. And by the way, in ERP implementations, the change management thing is still not solved.
No.
I've been through several ERP deployments. Change management has to be at the core of it, because you're changing the way people work. You change the way people work, you create discomfort. You have to find a way to show them what's in it for them and why is it better for them. Yes, for the organization, but also for them, because they are humans and they have feelings, emotions, needs, desires, ambitions, and you have to fit that. And you were talking about EQ, but you have to fit that in the reality of what you're trying to accomplish as well.
So we talked about, what are some of the qualities and what it is and what it's not. Let's talk about some of the blockers that still exist that really prevent high-performing leaders today. What are they, in your opinion?
What prevents high-performing leaders in the data space from realizing their objectives and their strategies? I think it's a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding as to how long does it take to get there.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'm not going to make a lot of friends with what I'm about to say, but
it's okay. It's just the two of us right now.
Yeah, that's it. We won't share this with anybody. But there are way too many vendors out there that sell these promises of AI, and everything does AI. And let's forget about, linear regressions. Let's just go straight into some obscure neural network that's going to pop out a prediction and we don't understand how it's working. There's a lot of value to AI. I teach that stuff. I love that stuff. But there's also a lot of value to setting up the foundation first properly, because the quickest way of being wrong is putting in a new platform with wrong data and spitting out AI models. All you're doing is just you're wrong faster. That's all. And when we have different organizations, different people like coming and telling you, yeah, in 6 weeks, I can get you your forecasting done and it's going to deliver incredible value for your organization. Great. But that only represents part of the work. Okay. There's a significant amount of work that needs to be done on the data prep side, on the setting up of the foundation. And so we get all these ideas and we want to move fast, and I get it, but sometimes we need to be careful with the corners that we decide to turn and cut, because it's going to come back and create some technical debt that we're going to be stuck with from a data perspective later, and will impact the viability, the sustainability, and the quality of the outputs that we're going to be generating over time through those models. So to me, there's a big thing that impacts us in that reality. Then there's also the fact that I was looking at a document that showed the landscape of all of the different data and analytics tools that exist out there. And there are so many of them.
I know.
And there's always something new. And everybody wants the newest thing. But at some point, we need to stop and think, okay, what are we doing? Are we doing it the right way? Are we selecting the right tool and we're going to invest and we're going to be building with it? Or are we going to want to change every year, which is not the right approach either? Like, there's a lot of moving parts that make it difficult to move forward. The other thing is just having the support from the organization to make the changes that need to be made in order to be able to move forward. We're talking about transformation. We're talking about a data transformation at the core of the organization. When you're transforming, we talked about it earlier, whenever you bring in change, you're going to create discomfort. But if we're not willing to accept that discomfort and live with it temporarily, it's going to hurt. It's going to be kind of weird and we're not going to like it, but it's okay. We have to go through those growing pains in order for us to get to that next level where we're going to be able to generate all of that incredible value that we're looking forward to.
Right. That's very well said. And I think to your point about technical debt, I mean, we are significantly dealing with a lot of technical debt right now, right? And if you look at all the traditional businesses and the need for them to modernize, whether it's, establishing a new data platform or just modernizing the ones that they have, you add that layer on top of it and the length of time that takes to do properly. Right? Anyone can modernize and flip the switch, but is, as they say, the garbage in, garbage out, so to speak, when it comes to data. Yeah.
And, you're talking about platform modernization, and those are things that I've been doing quite a bit of. And I did at Ubisoft, and I'm doing at BRP, and I did at Aldo, and I did at many other places. Those are the tough projects. They're long. They're long and they're expensive and they're complicated. But you have to go through them because technology is changing. If you think that you can get away with a traditional on-prem data warehouse with, one of those big data platforms on the side for your data lake and whatnot, not anymore. This is not where you need to be. So today we know where we should be going, like a cloud consumption-based data platform that you have the ability to virtualize your data in your environments, and that's where we need to go. But those things don't get done overnight. When you've invested so much money, so much time in developing applications and processes and reports and models running on your legacy platforms, being able to shift all of that over to your new fancy data platform doesn't get done in 6 months. Because you don't want to bring it over in the same way either that you built it 10 years ago. You want to re-engineer the way things are done so that you can leverage and get all the benefits from those new platforms you're deploying. That takes time. That takes planning.
It does. And it also takes a different approach to how you do it. You know what I mean? Gone, I think, are the days where you do that waterfall approach where you plan out the next 5 years and you have cadenced approach. It really needs to, as we talked about the advancements of technology and always the new, latest and greatest, you need to be able to iterate fast so that you don't lose everyone in the process. You keep everyone engaged and interested, but you're also moving things forward. But I think to your point, I think you nailed it earlier. It's the patience. We need
Right.
to have
It's
the
the patience.
patience to see it through one increment at a time versus the expectation of having the big bang. You know what I mean?
You're not going to get a big bang with data because data is not a project.
Exactly.
And people
Exactly.
tend to forget that. It's like, oh, we're doing a project for data. We'll be done in 3 years. And then what? We're not finished. There's always going to be a new data source. There's always going to be a new algorithm. We're always going to be changing systems outside of the data sphere, but we're going to need to bring that data in there
Right.
and remap it and convert it and update it and build new KPIs based on the new strategies we're deploying and new product lines we're going to want to bring in or companies we're acquiring, et cetera, et cetera. That's just the reality of data. If you think that you can go at it in a pure waterfall approach and have an end date, then you're missing the boat entirely. You can have a waterfall approach to we are acquiring a new reporting tool and we want to deploy it 100%. But then how you use that reporting tool and all the reports you're going to be building over the next God knows how many years, actually forever,
Right.
that's not waterfall. You're going to be delivering value every single time you output a new report or a new KPI or a new model. And we need to be cognizant that this is different than how we typically see those big ERP deployments, those big financial system deployments or HR system deployments.
Absolutely.
They're approached in a different way. But when you think of a data platform modernization program where the intent is to take your legacy and build something new and decommission the old one, you should still have milestones. You should still have a critical path. You still need to have some key dates. By the end of year one, all of our HR capabilities will have moved from the legacy to the new platform, and we'll be able to run people analytics off of that. But every single week, every single month, you'll have a new data source, you'll have a new KPI, you'll have a new table, you'll have things that are going to start to be usable by your business community.
So at the beginning of the conversation, I said, we're going to talk about data leadership and we're going to talk about what it's not. Now I want to talk about what it is. In your mind, what is, effective, true data-driven leadership? What does that look like for you?
It looks, it's a really good question, honestly, because there are so many different directions that conversation can go. It's going to depend a little bit on your organization as well. Is it going to be more someone who's focused on a data defensive strategy? Is it someone that's more focused on the data offense, customer acquisition and sales and leveraging data to generate revenue? So, if you're in the banking industry, maybe you have a bigger focus on protecting data
risk and compliance or something
exactly, risk and compliance, which becomes a very big part of what your data leadership is going to be responsible for and focused on. If you're in retail, maybe yes, risk and compliance is obviously important because you have PII coming in from all of your consumers that are sharing data with you. However, your focus might be more on new products and understanding the market, and so you're going to be driving that data in a different way than you would in a highly regulated compliance driven organization. But your data leadership is going to be about openness, about collaboration, about business value, about not doing technical projects because you think they're cool and you want to try the latest tool, but rather always starting from what are we trying to accomplish as an organization?
Absolutely.
Am I trying to sell more Ski-Doos? Am I trying to reduce my costs or my investments, or what am I trying to do? What are my business strategies? And then one level down, if I'm in HR, what am I focused on as a strategic pillar? Take the market right now. It's incredibly hot. Retention is difficult. Acquisition is difficult, right, of employees. Well, if I'm in an HR function, my strategies are going to be more around maybe retention and acquisition and talent recruitment and all that stuff. So if I'm in the data leadership, I need to understand that. So there's that very strong focus on understanding what the business realities are and then translating it into what am I going to do to make that happen on the other side.
Right.
So
spoken
sorry,
like a
go ahead.
true data leader. Look, we're coming up to our time. I feel like we can go a little bit, much longer, but I know that you have to go. But before you do, I've got a couple of rapid fire questions I want to throw at you. Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure whatsoever. All right. What motivates you every day?
Getting up and doing data. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's data.
What frustrates you the most?
The complexity of getting people to understand how data actually works. And yeah, definitely.
Now, is it data driven or data driven?
It's data informed.
Ooh,
I threw one out there.
That
right?
one. I'm gonna keep that one.
People drive decisions. Data informs the people to make the decisions.
I love it. All right. Which of the BRP products is your favorite one?
Right now, the Skidoo, because it's winter and it's snowy, and I'm on that Skidoo all the time.
I'm right there with you. And what is the one piece of advice you would give to yourself, your 25-year-old self?
Piece of advice I'd give my 25-year-old self? Wow. Keep learning about data, because it's never going to be static. It is fluid. And if you can't handle the stress, then don't get into it, because it's going to keep you awake all the time. Look at the beard. See, it's white now and the hair is gone. And I had plenty of it before I started into data.
There's a reason why mine is all pulled back. But anyway, I digress. This was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time today, and I hope you'll join us again in the future.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
Thank you for checking out this episode of Data Driven Leaders. This show is brought to you by Gen Squared, an organization dedicated to solving data and analytics challenges for the modern enterprise. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow Data Driven Leaders wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit gensquare.com to get immediate access to all of the latest episodes.